welcome to another episode of the Jimmy Rex Show. Today on the podcast, we sit down with Jay Paterno. And if you are a fan of college football or sports in general, then you've obviously heard of the Paterno family and very familiar with Penn State University. All-time winningest coach in college football is his dad, Joe. And I wanted to get Jay on the podcast today, talk about his new book, Blitz, just talk about the modern game of college football and what's going on, what's different from even from the years when his dad was coaching and he was coaching with him, and just really dive into everything that has to do with college sports. It's a crazy landscape right now. So without further ado, Jay, welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Good to be here.
Well, let's start with this. I'm in Utah. I'm a BYU fan, actually. After the last couple of days, it's been the only thing in the news is Penn State is heavily recruiting BYU's coach Kalani Sitake, and it looked like he was going to go to Penn State for a second. Do you have an update for us? I know you're a guy that's in the know, so I figure I'd get you on and let's talk about it.
Well, it's leaked out that he's going to stay. It sounds like, it looks like that's the way the cookie is going to crumble, so to speak. If you've been following the story, there's been the co-founder of Crumble Cookie is a BYU alum. I guess he's been involved. So I guess, when you charge $5 for a cookie, you make a lot of money. They are good cookies, though. I mean, I will give them that. And they're worth every penny. But I think it's one of those things where if he is staying, which it looks like he is, he's a BYU alum. He's from there. He's been there 10 years. He's a member of the Latter-day Saints. So, I mean, this is one of those things. If I had grown up in South Bend and played at Notre Dame and, coached at Notre Dame, I mean, when you start talking about, if the money's that much different, that's one thing. But when you add in the money being the same and, being at home and you throw God into it, which is part of it. I mean, that's it's tough to beat God, money, and home.
It's pretty good triple combination that BYU had the recruiting pitch. How did Penn State feel about Kalani Sitake? You're obviously very familiar with, the pulse of what's going on over there. How did Penn State feel about getting him as a coach if he was an option? Just curious.
Well, we're in day 51 as of today, of the coaching search. So I think right now there's just some trepidation as to, when does this end and where does it end? And Terry Smith's been the interim coach now for 6 games. They've gone 3-3 and lost Indiana on a circus catch and lost Iowa by 1 out there. So, I mean, this team could very easily be 5-1 right now with this stretch. And you would be looking at saying, this guy's done a heck of a job. And so given the job he's done and given the way the team has played the last 6 weeks, there are a lot of people that want him to get hired. And are really excited about the fact that, he's a guy that's got ties to the history of the school, and he's spoken very openly about all that. And so there's a lot of our fan base that would like to coalesce behind him as a bridge to history and to now. But for whatever reason, that hasn't happened. And as a member of the board of trustees, I'm not going to get into all that stuff as to what should and shouldn't. But that's part of the equation right now. And he may be a guy that ends up getting it, but we'll see.
Yeah. Being a member of the board of trustees, how did you guys come to a conclusion to, you have a coach, James Franklin, and obviously he's getting paid a lot of money. The buyout is crazy, right? It's a lot of money to have to come up with. How difficult of a decision is that as, a member of the board of trustees to move on from a coach when he still has that much money left on the contract?
Well, surprisingly, we as trustees did not weigh in on, didn't have anything to do with it. Pat Kraft, the AD, made that decision. And, we kind of make those decisions in terms of money when the contract gets approved. So 4 years ago, November of 2021, we approved this, the compensation committee of our board approved this contract. So they were on board with it. So the buyout was part of that. Now, when you go fast forward to it, as it's turned out now with James Franklin getting a new job at Virginia Tech, the buyout has gone from $49 million to $9 million because it was the mitigation, which was wisely put into the contract. If I were James, I may have sat out a year or two. But I think he wanted to get on with coaching. I think he has a passion for it. I think it's good that he got back into it. Certainly, as a fiduciary of Penn State, knowing that we're only giving him $9 million as opposed to $49 million, I'm elated that he got back into coaching.
Yeah, it's like when there's a divorce, and I think if the wife gets remarried, you get a quick alimony. It's like as much as you don't want to see your woman move on, it's like, what, I'll gladly allow that so I can quit paying this money every month.
Oh, it's a good friend of mine. He was divorced. She started dating this guy seriously. It was constantly like, I am so rooting for this guy. And he explained why. So, yeah, I get it.
Well, it's interesting. You have obviously been around the game for your entire life, literally probably from the time you took your first steps. And to see kind of how it works today, it is such a different game today, even than it was, when you were coaching with your dad and everything else. But what do you think, your dad would have thought of the modern game today, the changes, the main different things that you have to deal with as a coach as opposed to when he was there?
Well, I think the guys of his generation, whether it's him or Tom Osborne or, even Bo Schembechler, guys like that in that era, I think they would have been much more proactive than what we've seen from this generation of coaches and administrators and presidents. When California passed the law on NIL, I think they would have gotten together and said, okay, where does this plane land? And let's make sure we're helping land it and get it. And let's get to something that works for everybody and makes this as even and as fair to everybody as possible. That has not happened. It has been bounced from one court case to another. Whatever the latest thing with the judge happens is where we land as a model. So I think they would have been more proactive. I think they also would have been real. He would have been more real, very realistic about what we're doing here and saying, look, there's a happy medium in here, but what no one's talking about right now, which I think he would have been very passionate about given his track record, is the academic side of it. No one talks about what all this jumping around means to the academic side of it. I started my coaching career at UVA, and they're in the ACC championship game with a quarterback who's on his fourth school. And that's not to judge anything, but I mean, that seems strange to an old school guy. But I think, he was a realist. He was a guy that changed with the times, and he would have certainly adapted as well as tried to shape the times. I think that's the difference is we don't have anybody trying to shape this right now.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I mean, there's really no leadership at the top of the NCAA. It doesn't feel like there's just like that, like there needs to be like a commissioner or something. Somebody can actually put into place what's happening. Your new book, Blitz, you talk about a lot of these, modern problems or pressures, I guess you could say, that are facing college football. What made you want to talk about this or go dive into this topic and maybe explain a little bit to the listener what is so different about today versus in the past?
I'd written a book about my dad after he died about 11 years ago, wrote the book. And then I was starting on another book, and I was going to write about my experience in coaching and the things I had seen and all these things. And as I started to write it, I said, I can't write this as a nonfiction book because lawyers will tie it up forever because they'll say, well, you say this about this school and this coach and that coach. So I used a different device. There was a book called Primary Colors, which was about a presidential campaign. Yeah. And I read that. I said, I'm going to use that same kind of device to take what really happens in college coaching and write that book. And I wrote it called Hot Seat and I said it at Ohio State because I had spent 17 years recruiting that state and was familiar with it. So I said at Ohio State and basically had a fictional coach that was told you have 1 year to win or you're out. And so it takes you through all the ethical dilemmas. Now that book came out, people loved it. And they said, well, we want to know what comes next. Because within 2 years or 3 years of that book coming out, you had NIL, transfer portal, all these things. And I had done consulting and NIL stuff. So I had all kinds of background stories about what's going on now. So I basically took this coach into the next phase, into what it is now. So this is a book that pulls back the curtain on what's really going on in college athletics. And some of it's not pretty, some of it's downright ugly and sleazy. And it does it in a way that I can be completely honest about what's happening without having to worry about, somebody blowing my car up because I'm telling true stories about what's really going on. So, I mean, it does pull back the curtain for someone who's really interested in all the things that are going on. And it talks about the real pressures that coaches are under that are different now. It's a 24/7 constant, guys can transfer when they want. Now you're dealing with, I got to get this guy X amount of money for recruiting, and I got to give this guy money, and that guy money. And so all these things are different than what you had. And on top of that, you have the mental health issues that no one ever talked about, for years. You have all these other things going on that coaches are dealing with that are different.
Yeah. I speaking of the mental health side of it, it's interesting when you start talking about these college kids and the pressures of getting the money. I had Vince Young on my podcast, and he had talked about a young man that he was mentoring that committed suicide because his family was fighting over his NIL money and who was going to get what and how it was going to break down. I never even crossed my mind to think about something like that. Some of these pressures that these young kids have, things they have to worry about that they never had to in the past. It just really is a whole different ballgame today. And I'm glad that, again, you have a book that kind of talks a lot about a lot of these pressures. You use that word a lot. But as far as the NIL goes and the transfer portal, I think the combination of it has really created a little bit of a cluster for these coaches because you have to play a guy right away or else he's going to transfer, but sometimes they're not ready. And then you've got all this money and you've invested in these guys. What is the answer? Where does the game go from here? How do we make sure that college football maintains its amateur status, but also obviously the players need to get paid and what their, value is, but how do you keep the purity of the game, I guess, for lack of a better word?
I think the idea that we're going to have this amateur standard thing is probably gone. And I hate to say that. I'm a guy that believed in it, loved it in the whole 9 yards. And, I wrote a column years ago about, you talk about players aren't getting paid, but an out-of-state football player at Penn State was making roughly $90 to $100 an hour. When you broke down the scholarship into the number of hours, you said that's a pretty good deal. And, every other student at Penn State, if you said you're going to work doing something you love and graduate with no student debt, they'd take it. We'd all take it. So, I come from that to where now I'm realistic about where we're at in terms of when you talk about $1.1 billion a year in media rights for the Big Ten, that's just the Big Ten. That doesn't include March Madness. That doesn't include all these ticket sales. That's just media rights. We're long past the point where this is just an extracurricular activity. I think there's a happy medium where we strike a place where the academic side is important. That's part of the process, but as well as getting NIL money and revenue sharing money, I think all those things can coexist. I think you look at Ohio State had the top APR academic performance rating of all football teams in the country last year, and they won the national championship. So they've shown you can do it. Notre Dame is doing the same kind of things. And that's something we want to happen here at Penn State. But I think the reality is we've got to get to a point where at this point, I've talked openly about members of our governing bodies, which I'm a trustee at Penn State. We need to start to get involved, not in who we hire as coaches or what the depth chart looks like, but we better start to get involved in the discussions as to what this college football model is going to look like. It's time to strip the thing down. It's time to start this whole thing over. We're tied to these old calendars where the signing day is this date or the transfer portals. We need to start looking and say, forget what we have, what would be ideal and what can be realistic. And that's what we got to get to.
Well, you look at this year, you got the Lane Kiffin situation. Even right now, the thing with Kalani Sitake, BYU's playing one of the biggest games in their career against Texas Tech to go to the college football playoff. And the only story for the last 3-4 days is Kalani Sitake going to Penn State or is he going to stay here at BYU, right? It's just the calendar's screwed up. They've got it all backwards. And again, I think that goes back to who's running this, who's in charge. And you see the Big Ten and the SEC have kind of made moves where they're like, hey, we kind of don't need you guys. And if it's not going to be overbalanced in our favor, we might do our own thing. Like you look at it this year, you've got either Tulane or James Madison's going to steal a spot from either, BYU or Tennessee or Vanderbilt or maybe even Notre Dame. And so all of a sudden you start looking at this and you go, okay, what is the answer to kind of make this all work a little bit more cohesively? But like you said, even just the timing of how things happen right now, like Lane Kiffin or even leaving to go to LSU, what a disaster that is for his team and just kind of for the sport in general.
Yeah. And you put a signing, the signing date didn't used to be the first week in February. There was no early signing date. And I'll never forget when people were debating that, and it happened after my dad was done coaching and it passed. But he used to tell us, you guys want an early signing date, you understand, coach is going to start getting fired in October. And we're like, no, who would fire? And look what happened. Guys are getting fired in October because they want to get the new guy in to save the recruiting class. And if you move the sign date back to February, that helps. If you move the transfer portal thing, that helps. And there's not as much pressure, to fire people in October as there is now. And there's not as much pressure to have somebody in place. You look at the NFL. The Cleveland Browns can't go chase John Harbaugh and the Ravens right now and convince him to leave the Ravens before they go to the playoffs if they make the playoffs.
Right.
You can't do it because there are rules in place. There's a calendar in place, and these things all have a place a time and place where you do it. And if you mess around with that, you get hammered with loss of draft picks, you get fines and that kind of stuff. So I think it's going to require that at some point, like I said, we need to rescale and redesign exactly what college football is going to look like going forward.
Well, you have such an interesting life, Jay. It's one of those people that the more I started digging into this, and you are the son of this most iconic human being. Literally share his namesake and raised by this man who did things in college literally nobody else has ever done. And the benefits that come with that. And then obviously, towards the end, some things happen and a lot of people have opinions and everything like that. How do you find your own path in life? I'm just curious, like, as somebody that, like you have such a big father figure, it's a very fascinating topic to me, but how do you carve your own path in life, yet still honor, the heritage that you come from?
Right. I think, when I was finishing up college, I wanted to coach. And, my dad gave me an article. It was New York Times. I forget who wrote it, but the point of the gist was, the headline was "Released from Expectations, a Son Finds His Own Path." Okay.
Mhm.
And he wrote and said, he wrote a note on, basically said, hope this, helps you. And he would do that. He would take articles and he'd photocopy them, write a note and send them to you. And it was just kind of a lesson of like, look, I don't care if you coach or not coach. I mean, he kept saying, he and my mom, why would you want to coach? He would say, look, my career is an exception. You're not going to get somewhere and stay put someplace for, whatever number of years it was at that time. He said, just understand that's the exception. And he just wanted to make sure that if I wanted to coach or do what I wanted to do, I was doing because that's what I wanted to do. And so my parents are great. Whatever you want to do, do. And so I I left Penn State for 5 years, came back and coached with them. And then the last couple of years, I had some chances and and people talked to me about leaving, but I felt like I wanted to be there through the end of his career. But at the same time, I had already started writing columns as kind of a sidelight. I'd done some things politically as in my own time, in my spare time. I'd started writing and doing some other things. So a lot of these other things were part of my life, which gave me, I think, really good balance to the pressure of the constant pressure of coaching. Was a chance to get out and do something that would, I don't golf. I only started fly fishing after I got done coaching. So I didn't have those other hobbies that a lot of other people do because I can't golf to save my life. But so I found these other paths, and I think it gave me, I think my parents gave me an inner confidence to have that. I think it's tough when you are raised as you come in, you have successful parents. It's
Right.
very difficult because there is this, especially with fathers and sons, there's this expectation that I've got to be bigger than he is. I've got to do something better than he did. Especially competitive people. And, I quickly came to the conclusion, look, I'm not going to win 400 games as a coach. I mean, why even think you're going to do that? And be confident in who you are and what you're doing. And if every day at the end of the day, you can look yourself in the mirror, be confident that you did what you should do that day, then that's enough. And I think you see people struggle with that all the time.
Yeah, I think you have a unique perspective to be able to speak about that. I think so many people, they have these expectations of what their life's supposed to look like. A lot of times they're not even their own expectations. And they're faults from their parents or their community or wherever that might be. And a lot of pain can come from feeling like you need to be something different than maybe what you are. And so that's just an interesting thing for me to kind of look at. I'm very fascinated by people that are raised by such iconic figures. Everybody wants their time. They want their attention. What are a couple things you learned from your dad that maybe we wouldn't know just from, following his career from, the media's point of view?
One of the things that he told me before I had kids, we used to walk home from games. So he lived their house. My mom's still there. Their house is only 3 or 4 blocks from campus.
Oh, wow.
And really only about a 15-minute walk from the stadium. So he started walking home from games early in his career because when you come off a game, you have this adrenaline rush, and it's like a drug. It's a very addictive thing, and you get this high from being in the ebb and flow of a big time game where your calling plays every 35 seconds and your mind is racing, and then the whole thing. So you have to come down from that high, so to speak. So he would start walking home from games. So he and I would walk home from games when I was on the team. And then when I left, I came back and I said, hey, we should walk home again. And he goes, yeah. He goes, you'd be surprised. I actually found my way home without you for 5 years. So, I'm capable of getting home without you. But we did it again because it was just something that we had. And the one time I was talking about a kid that we had recruited who hadn't quite panned out yet as to what we thought he was going to be. And he said, Jay, you got to be patient with kids. He said, but you're not a parent yet. But when you are, you'll realize that you're only as happy as your least happy child. And he said, understand, it doesn't mean you give them everything they want. And when they throw a temper tantrum, you say, here's the money or the car or whatever it is. You have to raise them. You have to prepare the child for the path, not prepare the path for the child. And he said, and that's how you get truly happy people, young people. And he said, every kid that we have recruited somebody put 18 years of their life into that young man. Could be the mom and dad, could be a grandmother, could be an aunt, could be whoever. And we have an obligation, we bring them in to continue what they've done and make them better people than when they left and make them understand what life's about. And so that's the biggest responsibility we have. And that lesson about being a parent certainly has resonated with me as a parent myself now, but also the rest of my coaching career. I looked at everything differently because that was the core foundational value of what that program was all about. And those things are, that's not something he talked about a bunch. And I think that's something that really is a lesson that should even resonate even now.
Yeah, no, that's great. Based on kind of how everything went towards the end, I know it's been very important for you to honor his legacy and to be able to make sure that people, see your father for the legacy that he built and not for a few of those things that, obviously went down towards the end of it. How difficult was that to watch that after so many years of giving to all these kids that he coached and the university, everything else, to see so much backlash based on the Sandusky stuff and everything else that went down?
Well, really, I mean, when you look at it from a legal standpoint, I mean, he was in the grand jury, a 3-year grand jury for 7 minutes because he was really a tangent to this whole case. He was told something was reported to him one time, and he followed university policy and state law to the fullest extent he was allowed. And that story never got out. I mean, initially, the state attorney general, when they were bringing these charges, said that Joe was forthcoming and did what he was supposed to do and was honest through the whole thing. And the prosecutors, even a year later, said there was no cover up, nothing. But the media narrative very quickly settled on him. So he was really a cancel culture victim early on before we even talked about cancel culture. People found the clicks were on the side of putting Joe in the story. I mean, Saturday Night Live did the Weekend Update story the Saturday after he was fired. They mentioned my dad's name a bunch of times. They mentioned Penn State's name a bunch of times. They never once mentioned the guy who actually was accused of the crime. He became the central figure. So that part has been frustrating because there are people that just don't get it. They want to believe the worst in people rather than give people benefit of the doubt. So, I mean, that's been hard to deal with. But the point, you reach a point where you say, the people that matter know. I was, at one point was being asked about running for office, and I was in then Vice President Joe Biden's office. And Joe Biden pulled me aside and talked about, the fact that I was out there sticking up for my dad, even, after he'd passed, and how much respect he had for what I was doing. And he said, look, 90% of the people know exactly the kind of person your father was. They know what a great man he was. He said, the other 10%, you never had him, you're never going to get him, to hell with him. And it was great advice. And it went back to something my dad used to tell me all the time. He said, look, you're never going to get everybody to like you. You want something to be unanimous. It just doesn't exist. And he said, we were raised Roman Catholic. We believe Jesus Christ was the Son of God. He had 12 apostles and one of them betrayed him. So even he couldn't keep everybody on board. And he was the Son of God. So who the hell do you think you are? So, I mean, it was one of those things that I had forgotten about until Joe Biden made that point to me. And on the way home, driving home, I'm like, oh, my God, I lost that lesson in all this. And you're just thankful that you have those lessons to hold on to.
Yeah. Was there anything you took away from it personally, watching your dad go through that at that point in his life, or anything that you just, being so close to a story that was getting so much national attention? Like you said, they really... he became a focal point in the entire story. And was there anything that you just that it changed the way you thought of life, or the way that, you saw him treated by certain people? Or...
Well, first of all, for him, there was a complete lack of bitterness on his part. I mean, he never once railed against anybody. There was no vitriol. There was at one point, there's dozens and dozens of reporters camped out across the street from the house or outside the house. And one of my siblings had complained about him. He said, look, don't get mad at those people. They have an editor, they have a boss, they have somebody that's telling them to be there. They don't necessarily want to be there. Don't be mad at them. And I was like, wow, what perspective in this moment. Here I am, But I think the thing going through that, I think it shows you how fragile things are. He used to always tell us, he at the height of his career, he would say, look, this can all go away tomorrow. I mean, you understand that, guys, and understand that the people that remain with you will be the people that count. when you go through tough times, when you go through adversity. And that lesson, he died within 2-3 months of this all happening.
Right.
That lesson certainly stuck with me. And I remember telling my wife and my kids, saying, "Now, look, you're going to find out who really cares about you as a person when you're no longer part of the big show and when you're going through difficult adversity." I think that's hard for people to understand. They get to a point where they're the head coach at a school, or they're this political, or they're boss of this company. And when it goes away, some of the people they thought were with them just go to the next person. I think that was a good lesson to get out of all this.
Yeah, I listened to your eulogy that you gave to your father. It's known actually as one of the top 50 speeches ever given. And I thought that was pretty cool.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, it was just, yeah, I mean, the thing, one of the things I always say is like, what do you want people to say at your funeral? What you want an exercise? I run a men's coaching program, and an exercise I do with the men is I actually have them write from their wife, their kid, and their best friend's perspective, a eulogy, what the people would say what they want them to say at their funeral.
What they want them to say, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes what you want them to say will be dramatically different from what they say. But, that was one of the most challenging things I've ever had to do in my life, because, it was on 3 networks, it was on worldwide live. And so there was obviously, I put a lot of time into it. But there's still an element of going right before that happened. And Phil Knight, who's the CEO of Nike, had spoken earlier in that event and did a great job. And so I go backstage to go to the bathroom before I'm about to speak. And I put my folder down with my speech. And I go to the bathroom, I come back, and the folder's gone. And this is like 3 minutes, like T-minus 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And I'm on CNN, ESPN, Big Ten Network. Oh my God, do I even remember what the hell I wrote? Oh my God. And all of a sudden I see Phil Knight sitting there laughing. And he goes, "Here it is." And it was just that little device put me at ease and kind of got me into the right place. And I went up and gave a speech. So, but it's like you said, how do you want people to remember you, and what do you want them to say about you? And I'm working on a book on leadership. And one of the chapters is going to has the first line of your obituary already been written.
Mm.
For a guy like Barack Obama, it doesn't matter what he does the rest of his life. The first line is going to be former President Barack Obama.
Sure.
That's going to be it. I mean, but the challenge for the rest of us is to put your feet in the ground and say, "Hey, let's do something bigger and better that supersedes what I've already done." And that's what I try and do.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, college football, again, is a lot of the focus of your book is around kind of where the game's going and stuff. It's changed so much in the last 5-10 years. What do you see things going in the next 5-10 years?
And again, I say this as an old school guy who doesn't necessarily like what's happening, but is realistic about it.
Sure.
I think we're going to have to get a collective bargaining situation with players, because that's just, it's just, I think the leadership of universities, and when I say leadership, I mean, as a member of a governing board, I think we have to get involved now, because presidents are jumping around, in 2 and 3 and 4 years, and athletic directors and coaches are jumping around. So I think it's going to be important for the people who have the enduring fiduciary responsibility of the university to get involved in what the model is going to look like. But I think once we get in that room, we're going to have to redesign the model. Collective bargaining is going to have to be part of it, because it'll protect the schools and the players. Players that are getting run off now will at least have some recourse and say, no, I have a contract, and you can't just kick me to the curb and force me out or whatever. So I think that's going to have to be part of it. I think that there's going to have to be some realignment in terms of how this whole thing works, in terms of the Big Ten with the number of schools we have, and the SEC. I think it's going to be some more equitable distribution of this whole thing to keep the game healthy all over the country. I think those are some things that have to happen, and it's going to take some leadership to do that.
How does social media affect the game today with the kids versus, when you were coaching?
When I was coaching, it was still part of it. People were still getting on social media and going after kids. But with NIL, so much of what they're required to do for whatever company they're doing is to post about that company, to post about whether it's Nike or Coca-Cola or whatever it may be. And once you do that, now you have people that can get at you, because your social media has to be accessible. So there's more pressure on kids. And, I used to tell guys I coach, like, just don't look at it. I mean, or have a private account or whatever. But with NIL, they've got to have a public account, because if only their friends can see them promoting whatever brand that they're promoting, it doesn't do the brand any good. So I think I think that's a big part of the mental health aspect of being able to go out there and do that, but also to be able to deal with what comes on the back end of it, and the backlash is going to happen, because if you're out there promoting a brand and you throw 3 interceptions and lose the game, somebody's going to come at you and say, "Oh, if you didn't spend all this time promoting company X, or maybe if you were as good as company X's product, we wouldn't have lost the game, or you wouldn't stink." I mean, and I think the part of the social media aspect that's been difficult is the game has become so professionalized. The players are making a lot of money, coaches are making a lot of money, and the fans know that. So they're not looking at them as the 18-year-old kid who's out there for the good of their alma mater. They're looking at the 18-year-old kid who's catching in. So, and then when you add in the proliferation of legalized gambling, the fans are even more invested, pun intended, in the outcome of the game. So if they know their quarterback's making $2 million into a game costing interception that costs them money, they're going to be even more angry, especially when they've had a couple beers in the stadium, which, we never sold beer in the stadium before. So now you got all these things come into play, which has created a much more difficult social media environment for student athletes.
Yeah, I mean, if you never had people attacking you online, it can be very uncomfortable. I'm sure you experienced plenty of that, in your life.
Yeah.
But, when you think about it, I'm in my 40s now, but when I was a kid, I don't know how I would have handled it at being 19, 20 years old. And like you said, I think the, legalized gambling in so many ways has really changed that. We see, Major League Baseball has ran into some issues, and the NBA's ran into some issues of some of this tampering with games and things like that. How big of a problem do you think gambling has become, so because the access to so many college kids? I can't imagine this is good for any of them, but it's so accessible now. And I was just wondering what your take is on that.
I think it's only a matter of time till something blows up. I mean, that's just the reality. And when you start talking about prop bets and things like that, if I'm a Penn State guy and I was friends with teammates with Tyler Warren at the Colts, and texting with Tyler Warren, he said, not that I'm just throwing names out,
Of course.
But Tyler Warren goes, "Yeah, tweaked my ankle today in practice on Thursday. I may not go on Sunday." And there's a prop bet that he's going to have 100 yards receiving. Well, guess what? I'm telling my teammates, get under and bet that he's going to be under because he's not playing, or he's going to play half the game, whatever it may be. So and there's prop bets on college. So you have all these things now. It's just a matter of time. And we saw when there wasn't legalized gambling, we saw gambling scandals in college sports. And it's like you said, it's only a matter of time.
I saw a stat recently that said only 18% of adults feel like having a college degree is an advantage in today's world. What do you think about that?
I think that's something that we have to, that to take away the athletic side, as a
Right.
college trustee, that polling is very troubling. And that's, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, almost 70% of voters aged 35 to 49 who would be having kids about to go to college felt that was not worthwhile taking out student loans to go to college for the value of an education. I think we have to look at what we're asking, what it's costing. Do we need 4 years? Do you have to go for 4 years? Can you get a degree in 3, which now all of a sudden brings the cost down 25%? I think there's a lot of value to going to college and getting the kind of education you get at the university. But I think right now we're not doing a very good job of educating people as to what the true value is. And part of it is because of the massive amount of debt that people are going into to get that degree.
Yeah, it just fascinates me. I know, I went and got my degree, and I think for me, the value of going to college was the people I met, the connections I made, the networking that I did. I was actually pretty surprised at how worthless the actual education part of it was. I went to Arizona State and then a local college here in Utah, and it was I just didn't learn that much. But I wonder how many people had my similar experience, and I just don't know. But, you see a lot of these kids nowadays, and AI and everything that's coming, seems like a lot of the trades are going to be some of the more popular jobs that are going to be paying the most, because they're, plumber, electrician, some of these things that other AI can't replace. But it'll be fascinating to see what happens to the entire college education system and how that affects the sporting side of it, as more and more people graduate and kind of find themselves not necessarily in a career they thought they might be able to get by going to college.
One of the things that there's now an outsized importance being put on college football is that becomes a drawing card to people to go to college. Like, oh, wow, like it'd be great to go to college at a place like Penn State or Alabama, whatever, because that's part of the experience. And I get this sense of belonging by being in the student section, whatever it is. So I think schools are now valuing this even more so, and maybe to the point where they're putting too much value on it to where they're willing to take some shortcuts because it may help drive encourage enrollment as we go to the demographics now of the college. The birth rates are going down right
Sure.
now, so the next 18 years are going to be very challenging.
Yeah, I think I saw some studies when Alabama hired Nick Saban. He was the highest paid employee in Alabama by a long shot, right? But they showed that he literally upped the entire revenue of the college by over 20% just because of the amount of people that wanted to be involved with the university while he was the football coach there. It shows you the importance, of college football to a university.
They made a very conscious effort that they were going to boost their enrollment and go beyond the current numbers and aggressively recruited kids from all over the country in terms of students. They're at college fairs in Connecticut, you name it, and they're offering kids discounts. They've done a good job of kind of parlaying that and getting an expanded enrollment, and they've gone far more out-of-state kids as in that process. So there can be a role for it. There's no question.
How did, one from a PR perspective, I'm a marketing PR guy in a lot of ways too. I'm curious, Penn State, I feel like was able to fix their reputation very quickly for having, as big of a scandal as it did. What were a couple things that you learned through it or you saw that Penn State did well, or maybe some things that maybe they should have done better as far as the imaging after the fact and being able to, resurrect their image as a, top tier program and one that didn't need to worry about having the kind of issues that they were dealing with?
Well, initially, from the crisis management standpoint, we completely botched it. I mean, there's no question Penn State did a lousy job. When the story broke, they were not prepared. They did not have a crisis management firm on retainer. Some members of the board got in charge very quickly and said, well, this is what we're going to do, and we're not going to do this. So the first time anybody went on camera was, this story had broke on a Friday afternoon. And the first time anybody from the university went on camera to address it and was allowed to go on camera was the following Wednesday night. And at that point, they fired the head football coach and the president of the university. So you went 128 hours without responding on camera. So it was an absolute disaster. The story got away from them. The further away you are, the more it seems the reputation kind of came back. And being further across the country than you are, certainly within the state of Pennsylvania, within the Northeast, it lingered for quite a while because of that initial reaction and because of our inability to this day, when you look at the facts of that case, the overwhelming majority of the things that happened in that case did not happen on our campus, had nothing to do with our campus. And the mistake that we made is we took it on and started to pay out claimants that never even had anything to do with Penn State. So it looked like all these things happened on our campus. But it was kind of a corporate mindset of let's just pay people out that make claims and let's move on, which works in the corporate world. But if you have a Penn State degree, it became very difficult to get away from that because you can't sell your stock in Penn State because it's your degree. It's it's part of who you're being. So it's taken us a while, a lot longer than probably it should have, to kind of get out from under that. And there's still people that still have the wrong idea and the wrong narrative. But, like I said, you're never going to convince everybody of anything.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you taking some time. It's such an interesting thing, college football. It means so much to so many people. It's such a passionate thing. And with that, it come all the benefits of that, but also it becomes a very heavy responsibility. And, being, again, as involved as you are with the university, I guess, if you could, what's one thing that you think that you want to see happen just to leave the game in the best possible place that it could going forward as both a fan and then somebody that's just invested at the level that you are? What's something you really hope happens with the game here over the next year or two?
I hope we get to a point where, it's not so much about the Big Ten has to beat the SEC in money. The SEC has to beat the Big Ten in money. Yeah. I'd like to see the game, the money, the revenues of the game and everything a little bit more equitably distributed so that schools all over the place can compete on, can maintain a level of competition. I think with revenue sharing, with NIL stuff, I think the imbalances are growing. I don't think that's good. And the imbalances are going to favor the schools that have alumni that are going to come in and throw a bunch of money at them. in football. And the danger of that is once you start throwing a bunch of money at football, there's a bunch of money that doesn't go towards endowments, towards professorships, towards scholarships for students to come. So I want to get into a little bit better balance. I would hope that the finances, even at a place like Penn State, there are things we're doing right now that put us at risk financially. Even with all the money that we are, we're in the top 10, 15 schools in the country in terms of athletics revenue, but we're doing some things in terms of taking on some debt that put us at risk. So I'd like to see everybody get to where they're putting things on the right financial footing, but also not sacrificing the opportunities for so many female athletes and male athletes in other sports, because that's always one of the answers. Oh, well, we're having trouble financially. Cut this sport, cut that sport. I'd like to see those things all maintained.
Yeah, I mean, that's a scary thought to think the university is taking on loans to be able to stay competitive. You say that that's something that you already having to do at Penn State, even with just how the game is right now?
Well, when you look at the facilities wise, I mean, we're borrowing hundreds. When we get the stadium done, we'll be at a point where we're almost $800 million in bonds outstanding for facilities. And that's twice the level of anybody else in the country right now, which doesn't make me very comfortable as a trustee. At the time, part of the argument was, and not just athletics, there was a lot of borrowing going on at a lot of universities for a lot of things, not just athletics. And the argument was, money's never going to be this cheap. And I said, yeah, cheap is not free. A guy that writes you a check for $40 million says, build this building, that's free money. And even that's not free because that guy's going to want something. But at the end of the day, I think that's been the biggest thing that would keep me up at night.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Well, I appreciate you, Jay, coming on. And so you tell me it's pretty, from what you're hearing, Kalani's staying at BYU. That
sounds like, yeah. And look, selfishly, I would have liked a different outcome perhaps, because but you know what? I think there's something about guys that, my dad used to tell coaches when they get places, find some place you like and stay put. And if you can deal with the people you work with and you're making enough money that you're happy, and you don't always make it about the bigger dollar or whatever. So I'm, if he does stay, I'm happy for the people at BYU.
Yeah, well, there's something to be said for that. I mean, your dad was, how many years total was he at Penn State?
61 and 46 as the head coach.
The head coach. That's insane.
Yeah. It's odd. I mean, people are like, oh my God, yeah, I know.
How many times did they try to write him off in that 46 years? I mean, thankfully he was winning a lot, but I know that every coach, right? From John Wooden.
There was one time where they really kind of approached him and said, and there were other offers too to go other places. I mean, the biggest one was New England Patriots in 1972, end of 72, early 73. And they came in and basically said, he was making, I think, $24,000 a year at that time, maybe. And they offered him $280,000, which was the biggest contract at the time, plus offered him part ownership of the team. This is before the teams were valued like they are now.
I said that'd be worth something today.
Well, it was like 7 or 8%. And the Patriots were valued at like $8 billion. So that's $560 million. I'm like, hey, Dad, I admire your wanting to stay at Penn State, but all these years later, I'm going, if you knew it was going to be $560 million, he goes, well, yeah, that might have changed the calculus a little bit.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It was a time when guys got into coaching not because they could get rich, because nobody was getting rich.
Yeah, well, and it's just I don't think he would give up what he was able to do at Penn State for all the money in the world. So,
no question.
To read your book, they want to learn more about this, more about the college game, Jay, where's the best place we can send them?
Amazon has the book. My website, jvpaterno.com, has the book. Certainly bookstores all over the place, but those are the two main places to get it.
Awesome. Well, and I can tell you, Kalani, he's a personal friend of mine. I've known him for years and years, and I used to, for 5 years, I had sideline passes in his first 5 years there, and he's as good of a human as they come. So as for what it's worth, you picked a good one that you at least went after, whether it ends up happening. They don't make humans better.
Worse. You're making it worse.
They do not make humans better than that man, I'll tell you.
No, look, when I was a senior in college, we played BYU. And it was the first time we'd ever played them. And so we're at a bowl game. And one of my takeaways, we go to this luncheon with both teams. I'm like, oh my God, like these guys all got to bring their girlfriends, and like, my God, every one of them's got like a gorgeous girlfriend, so one of their guys that was at our table, I go, what gives? He goes, oh, they're all wives. And I'm like, what? He goes, yeah. I mean, like, then we come in, we redshirt, we go on a mission for 2 years, we come back, and by year 3 or 4, we're 22, 23 years old, and there's certain rules about certain things, so we get married. I'm like, oh, okay. But always had tremendous respect for that program because of what kids have to give up to go there and be part of it. I think that's really unique. My dad and Lavelle Edwards were really, really good friends, just to the point where he shows you a different time in coaching. We went out there in 92. I wasn't coaching there at the time. Went out there in 92 and played BYU, and it was a late afternoon game, so the team just stayed over that night. So Lavelle and my dad, after they beat us, Lavelle and my dad went out to dinner together. I mean, just a different world, you know?
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, I remember they had that friendship. So,
Yeah.
well, thank you again, Jay. And guys,
Enjoyed it.
look wherever you go, and good luck to whoever becomes the new head coach. And I'm sure you guys will be back on top before too long.
Appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Thank you, sir.
Take care.